you ever felt like you don't belong anywhere anymore? That conversations seem empty? That the people around you are living on a different frequency than yours? It's not arrogance. It's not contempt. It's something much quieter and more inevitable. It's consciousness growing beyond what the collective can contain. And when this happens, the distancing isn't a choice. It's an effect. Schopenhauer saw this with brutal clarity. There are types of consciousness that simply don't fit in the crowd. There's a moment in some people's lives when the mind crosses an invisible threshold. It's when you start questioning what everyone accepts without blinking. Why do we live like this? Why do we follow these patterns? Why doesn't anyone stop to really think? And then, without realizing it, you no longer fit in. Not because you decided to distance yourself, but because you started seeing things others prefer not to see. It's as if the world kept spinning at the same speed, but you slowed down to observe better. And in that deceleration, what once seemed normal now seems rehearsed, automatic, empty. This threshold isn't crossed all at once. It's gradual. It starts with small discomforts. A phrase that sounds false to you. A behavior that seems contradictory. A truth no one wants to hear. And these small discomforts keep accumulating until, suddenly, you realize you're completely out of place. Parties tire you. Meetings drain you. Social groups suffocate you. And you no longer know if the problem is with you or with the world. The truth is, it's neither one nor the other. It's just consciousness incompatibility. You grew in a direction most people don't grow in. And that has a cost. The crowd functions as a psychological shelter. People group together because there they find constant validation, emotional security, and above all, relief from the responsibility of thinking for themselves. When you're in the group, you don't need to question as much. The answers are already ready. The behaviors are already defined. What's right and wrong has already been decided by consensus. It's comfortable. It's reassuring. And any consciousness that starts questioning this comfort becomes a silent threat. Not because it attacks directly, but because its mere presence exposes the fragility of this shelter. And no one likes having their shelter shaken. Think of it this way. The group functions as a system of shared beliefs. Everyone tacitly agrees on what matters, on how one should live, on what success is and what failure is. And as long as everyone agrees, the system sustains itself. But all it takes is one person to start questioning these premises for the entire structure to tremble. Why? Because if you question, you force others to think, and thinking threatens comfort. So the instinctive reaction is to distance you. Sometimes it's subtle, a gradual distancing, fewer invitations, less intimacy, less space for your voice. And you realize that, unintentionally, you've become uncomfortable. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you changed to different. Thinking deeply creates distance, even when you don't want it to. You can be at a table full of people, smiling, participating, but your mind is elsewhere. It's reflecting on meaning, suffering, human contradictions, the limits of existence. And these reflections don't fit in superficial conversations. They don't fit in small comments about the weather or about what so-and-so posted on social media. The isolation emerges because not everyone wants or can sustain this level of reflection. There's a specific loneliness that's born from this incompatibility. It's not the loneliness of someone who's physically alone. It's the loneliness of someone who's surrounded by people but still feels isolated. Imagine a corporate happy hour. Everyone animated, laughing at the same jokes, complaining about the same bosses. And you there, smiling, nodding, but inside feeling an enormous emptiness. Because the words coming out of your mouth don't match the thoughts going through your head. You constantly censor yourself, knowing that if you say what you really think, you'll create discomfort. So you pretend. And inside you feel the emptiness growing. Because real connection isn't being close to someone. It's being understood. And when you think too deeply, understanding becomes rare. I completely understand when you feel bored where everyone else seems to be having fun. It's not that you're boring or hard to please. It's that elevated consciousness feels emptiness where most feel pleasure. Repetition, small distractions, empty conversations. All of this stops being satisfying. And this boredom doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from perception. You see the emptiness behind the excitement. You see that all of it is, at its core, an attempt to avoid internal silence. And when you can no longer fool yourself with the same distractions, the social world loses a good part of its charm. Or think about a family gathering, everyone talking about the same things as always: work, bills, gossip about distant relatives, and you there, trying to participate, but feeling that all of it is too superficial. Not because you think your family is bad, but because your mind already operates on a different frequency. And forcing that tuning exhausts you. It's not physical, this exhaustion. It's mental. It's emotional. Expanded consciousness starts seeing pain where others see normalcy. While most normalize frustration, anxiety, chronic fatigue, you start perceiving the silent suffering behind routines. You see that many people are just surviving, not living. You see the despair disguised as productivity. You see the sadness hidden behind the automatic smile. And this generates an inevitable emotional distancing. You can't ignore what you see. You can't go back and pretend everything's okay when it clearly isn't. You start noticing patterns. You notice that many people live on autopilot, following social scripts without questioning. Wake up, work, consume, distract, sleep, and repeat. And the more you notice these patterns, the harder it becomes to participate in them without feeling a tightness in your chest. You see the prison. You see that no one is really choosing. They're just reacting to the stimuli the system offers. And you're waking up to this, and waking up hurts. Truth is rarely socially desirable. The crowd prefers reassuring narratives to deep questioning. They prefer to believe that everything has meaning, that justice exists, that effort always pays off. And when someone points out that maybe it's not like that maybe life is more chaotic and less fair than we'd like, the reaction is defensive, because showing reality as it is threatens the collective psychological balance. And you, unintentionally, become that threat. Not because you attack people, but because your mere presence questions the illusions they need to continue. There's a silent pact in most social groups. Don't talk about certain things. Don't question certain structures. Don't point out certain contradictions. Because if we all pretend everything's okay, maybe we can believe it, and most accept this pact without realizing it. But you realize it, and realizing already puts you outside. You can no longer pretend. You can no longer participate in superficial conversations as if they were enough. And then you become the discomfort, the one who ruins the harmony. And gradually, they distance you, or you distance yourself, or both happen simultaneously. I know it's hard to hear this, but loneliness isn't a choice. It appears as a side effect of lucidity. When thinking changes, bonds also change, often silently. You don't wake up one day and decide to distance yourself from everyone. You just realize gradually that conversations no longer make sense, that encounters leave you empty, that you prefer being alone to faking connection where there is none. And that hurts. It hurts because you didn't want this. But it happens. It happens because consciousness that grows no longer fits in the same spaces. And the worst part is that no one prepared you for this. No one told you that thinking too much would distance you from people. No one warned you that seeing beyond consensus would put you on a mental island. You just kept growing internally, and when you realized it, you were already alone. And the loneliness that comes from lucidity is different from common loneliness. Because you know you're not alone from lack of options. You're alone because the available options seem insufficient to you. The more the individual perceives nuances of existence, the more intensely they feel. Elevated consciousness comes accompanied by amplified sensitivity. You notice small details, pick up on unspoken emotions, feel the sadness behind the forced smile. And this increases empathy, but it also increases pain. Because you feel too much. You feel the weight of the world. You feel others' anguish. You feel the falseness in interactions. And socializing becomes exhausting. Not because you're fragile, but because your perception is too sharp to ignore what happens between the lines. It's as if you've developed a kind of emotional radar. You enter an environment and immediately pick up the tension no one's talking about. You notice the unresolved conflict between two people. You feel the sadness someone is trying to hide. And all of this weighs on you. Because you can't turn off this perception. You absorb. And constantly absorbing others' emotions drains you. It exhausts you. And then you need to distance yourself. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Disagreeing internally already creates tension. You don't even need to verbalize anything. Just noticing the incoherencies in the dominant opinions, and there it is. the silent conflict is already installed. You feel you don't belong to that consensus. You feel you think differently, that you see beyond. And this internal conflict generates a subtle isolation. Most seek consensus because the group doesn't accommodate doubt, doesn't accommodate ambiguity. And you live in doubt. You live questioning what most accept as truth. And you notice something else. That many relationships are sustained by social roles, convenience, and appearance. You see the invisible masks. You see that many people aren't being authentic, that connections are superficial, that bonds depend on maintaining a facade. And when you notice this, it becomes difficult to sustain these relationships. Not because you're better than anyone, but because falseness suffocates you. You start realizing that many people don't really know you. They know the version of you that fits the expected social role, the version that doesn't question too much, that doesn't make people too uncomfortable. And that version isn't you. It's an adaptation. It's a mask you wear to move around without causing friction. But wearing a mask is tiring. And then comes the question, is it worth maintaining relationships where you can't be who you really are? And the answer often is no. And then comes loneliness. But at least it's authentic loneliness. Silence becomes internal refuge. Speaking less isn't shyness. It's conservation of psychic energy. Consciousness learns that not every truth needs to be told, that not every thought needs to be shared. Because often speaking only generates unnecessary conflict, so you withdraw. Not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You know that certain battles aren't worth it, that certain people won't understand, that certain environments don't accommodate your worldview, and silence becomes protection. There's something wise in knowing when to stay quiet, in understanding that not every person is ready to hear what you have to say. And then you learn to measure. You learn to choose your battles. You learn that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And that preserving your mental energy for things that really matter is more valuable than wearing yourself out, trying to be understood by those who don't want to understand. Most live in constant flight from deep thought. Distractions arise every second. Social media, shows, notifications, commitments, anything that avoids silence. Because silence forces confrontation with one's own mind. And many people can't stand being alone with themselves. They prefer external noise to internal quiet. And when you realize this, you understand why so many people seek the group. It's not connection they're seeking, it's escape. This escape is almost desperate. You see people filling every second of the day with some activity, some stimulus, some distraction. Because if they stop, if they stay in silence, they'll have to deal with the thoughts they're avoiding. And that's scary, so they prefer not to stop. They prefer to keep themselves busy. They prefer the group, the noise, the commotion. And you can no longer escape from yourself. You've already learned to live with silence. And that, ironically, distances you even more. But loneliness has a constructive aspect. The distancing allows internal organization, autonomy, clarity of thought. When you're alone, without social pressures, without others' expectations, you can really think. You can organize your ideas, process your emotions, understand who you are without the masks. Loneliness becomes a space of clarity. And that's not punishment, it's freedom. It's in loneliness that you find yourself. It's in silence that you hear your own voice. It's in distancing that you stop molding yourself to others' expectations and start molding yourself to your own. And that has invaluable worth. Because most spend their entire lives trying to fit in, trying to please, trying to be accepted. And they never discover who they really are. You're discovering. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely. But it's real. And real has always been worth more than comfortable. Being alone with yourself requires emotional maturity. Many people seek the group to escape unresolved internal conflicts. They prefer distraction to confrontation. They prefer external validation to understanding themselves. And when you can withstand your own mind, when you can stay in silence without despair, you understand that few reach this point. Because it's difficult. It's uncomfortable. But it's necessary. Withstanding your own mind is one of the hardest things that exists. Because the unedited mind, the mind without distractions, is intense. It brings up everything you were avoiding. It brings doubts, it brings fears, it brings regrets. And staying there, in the middle of all that without running away, requires strength. It requires acceptance. It requires maturity. And few develop this. But when you cross through this discomfort, you realize you no longer need anyone to feel complete. And that frees you in a way the group will never be able to. Schopenhauer describes the world lived by most as appearance, a veil that covers the deeper reality of existence. He called this representation, the superficial layer we accept as truth. But underneath this layer exists something denser, darker, more real. And when you cross through this veil, when you start seeing beyond appearance, you break identification with the crowd. Because collective enthusiasm starts seeming illusory. The parties, the celebrations, the shared objectives, all of this loses its shine when you see the blind will that moves existence. And then you can no longer go back. You can no longer pretend that you believe. Schopenhauer was one of the first philosophers to speak openly about this. To say that the world we see isn't the world as it really is. That there's a blind, irrational, insatiable force moving everything. He called it will. And this will has no purpose, has no meaning, has no direction. It just exists. And it drags us. And most live completely identified with this will, pursuing endless desires, seeking satisfaction that never comes, believing that the next goal will bring happiness. But you started seeing beyond that. This changes everything. When you understand that you're being dragged by a blind force, that desire is a trap, that satisfaction is always temporary, that we're all running after something that doesn't exist. When you see this, collective enthusiasm loses all meaning. And then, you can no longer go back. You can no longer pretend that you believe. If you're enjoying this content, maybe you'll also like our exclusive material that's in the first pinned comment. In Aphorisms for the Wisdom of Life, Schopenhauer goes further. He says that solitude isn't social failure, it's practical wisdom. He saw distancing as a way to preserve inner freedom, mental clarity, independence of thought. According to him, whoever constantly needs others' approval lives imprisoned by opinions, imprisoned by expectations, imprisoned by the fear of being rejected. But whoever learns to live with themselves conquers a freedom the crowd will never know. And this isn't coldness, it's autonomy. Schopenhauer took this seriously. He lived a good part of his life isolated, avoiding society, refusing social commitments. And it wasn't because he hated people. It was because he realized that social coexistence requires constant adaptation, requires that you give up parts of yourself to fit in. And he wasn't willing to do that. He preferred authentic solitude to superficial company. And he made this clear in his texts, that the capacity to be alone is one of the greatest signs of inner wealth, because whoever needs people all the time is, deep down, running away from themselves. And whoever can be alone without suffering is because they found something valuable within themselves. It's completely valid to feel this, to feel that you don't fit in, that people don't understand you, that the world seems too superficial. Because maybe it is. Maybe most are living on the surface, avoiding diving deep, avoiding looking at the naked truth of existence. And you, unintentionally, dove in. And now you can no longer breathe in the shallow. Lucid consciousness doesn't promise comfort, doesn't promise acceptance, doesn't promise that you'll feel part of something greater. It promises clarity. And clarity hurts. It hurts because it exposes illusions, because it breaks certainties, because it distances you from who you were before. Living consciously is accepting the distancing, the incomprehension, the loneliness, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of seeing beyond. And maybe that's what Schopenhauer tried to tell us, that there are minds that simply weren't made to live in the herd, not because they're superior, but because they see things the herd prefers not to see. And this clarity has a high price, because clarity doesn't let you lie to yourself, doesn't let you believe in fairy tales, doesn't let you pretend everything's okay when it's not. Clarity forces you to see life as it is, confusing, chaotic, often meaningless. And that's scary. It's so scary that most prefer the illusion. They prefer to believe in reassuring narratives. They prefer not to question. Because questioning opens doors you can't close, and you opened those doors. And now you have to deal with what you saw on the other side. And when you accept this, when you stop fighting against your own nature, something changes. You no longer feel guilty for preferring solitude. You no longer feel strange for not fitting in. You understand that this distancing is the price of lucidity, and that not everyone is willing to pay this price, but you are. Because you no longer have a choice. Because once you see, you can no longer pretend you didn't see. I'm not saying this to make you distressed, but to wake you up. To show you that what you feel isn't a defect, it's not a flaw. It's a consequence of a consciousness that grew beyond what's allowed. And maybe, deep down, you already know this. Maybe you just need to hear that it's okay. That you're not alone in this perception. That there are others who feel the same. That the loneliness of those who think deeply is different from the loneliness of those who are empty. It's an inhabited loneliness. A loneliness that hurts, but also liberates. Schopenhauer lived this firsthand. He spent his life being misunderstood, criticized, ignored. But he didn't change. He didn't adapt. He didn't pretend he saw less, just to be accepted. And he left a legacy that crosses centuries precisely because he had the courage to speak truths no one wanted to hear. Truths about suffering, about illusion, about the empty nature of human desires. And these truths continue to make people uncomfortable to this day. They continue distancing those who understand them, but they also continue liberating those who have the courage to look directly. So if you feel out of place, if you feel alone in the midst of the crowd, maybe it's not your problem. Maybe it's just that your consciousness no longer fits in the spaces most occupy comfortably. And this isn't arrogance. It's not superiority. It's just lucidity. And lucidity has always been lonely, has always been misunderstood, has always been the price you pay for seeing beyond the illusions that keep the world spinning. The crowd will continue in the shelter, will continue validating each other, repeating patterns, avoiding silence. And you'll continue on the outside. Not because you chose to, but because consciousness took you out of there. And maybe, with time, you'll realize that being on the outside isn't being lost. It's being free. Free to think, free to feel, free to exist without the invisible chains that bind most. And when you truly understand this, loneliness stops being weight and becomes space. Space to grow, to reflect, to know yourself without interference. The crowd can offer belonging, but it doesn't offer truth. And you've already chosen truth. Or rather, truth chose you. And now there's no going back. The consciousness that distances the crowd isn't a curse. It's awakening. And awakening has always been lonely, has always been misunderstood, has always been the path of those who don't accept living asleep. Schopenhauer knew this. He lived this. And he left it recorded so that others, like you, like me, would understand that they're not alone in this perception. That the distancing is part of it, that loneliness is effect, not choice, and that this, as painful as it may be, is a sign that you're seeing beyond what most can see. If these reflections on the price and freedom of lucidity made sense to you, subscribe to the channel for more content exploring these nuances of human consciousness. And in the comments, tell me, have you felt this distancing? Have you noticed that your consciousness no longer fits in the same places? I want to know if you're also living this.